Hello, friends, and welcome to the show. So, this episode, I'm going to be talking about the Derek Chauvin trial because that's all people are going to be talking about for the next month because they don't want to talk about Joe Biden basically losing his mind. I'll talk about that on the next video. And the Orange Man is basically faded into obscurity at this point. They try to bring him up every once in a while, but he's doing a really good job keeping his mouth shut. So let's get started. Jack Beside Big Tweets. Breaking: prosecutors will not include medical examinations performed by doctors hired by George Floyd's family in his murder case. And this is important to note because whenever you hire somebody to find something and you pay them a lot of money to find it, guess what? They're going to find whatever you want. And it should stand to reason that he probably lied in his findings because now that he has to basically testify under oath, if he testifies under oath and he basically perjures himself by basically saying that, oh no, I think he was asphyxiated while that knee was on his neck, while all the evidence points otherwise, basically he can lose his medical license. He can go to jail. So he doesn't want to basically feel the heat of the law on his neck. So I think that's why they're basically not including the medical examinations paid for by the George Floyd family. And also, I want to know who paid for that examination. CNN's doing a really good job paying people who like to burn down the country. So I wonder if CNN also paid that medical examiner. Jumping over to a tweet from Joe Biden. The American people need direct economic relief. And yet the response to that is, I want to talk about this. This dirty cop, Derek Chauvin, is a pig. Better be found guilty for this murder or all hell may break loose in Minneapolis. I have little faith already in the justice system. If this cop gets off with nothing, I'm done with the justice system forever. It's like, come on, people, that's not even what he's talking about. That has nothing to do with economic relief, yet you're threatening burning down cities. What's Joe Biden going to do? Andy No is basically screenshotting various Antifa accounts on social media are promising violence if the Derek Chauvin trial in Minnesota doesn't end the way they want. Derek Chauvin's trial is tomorrow. If he walks, we riot. We're agreed. If Derek Chauvin is found innocent, we're getting back out there. We need to get back out there anyway. But yes, this spring and summer needs to take what we did last summer and multiply it by a 10. How's that even possible? You did $10 billion in damage last year. Or no, excuse me, $2 billion in damage last year. More damage than has ever been done in the United States of America. You managed to do that, Antifa and BLM, and you were basically celebrated as the good guys for burning down people of color's small business. It's kind of disgusting. So, why do I think Derek Chauvin's going to get off? And well, it's not because of his skin color. It's because of the law. It's because of the autopsy. It's because of things called facts, right? And facts don't really care about mainstream media conspiracy theories. These blue anon types who are just basically wanting to burn down the world if they don't get their way. So let's find out why I believe what I believe. So basically, they talk about the bruises he has on his body. That's section one. So basically, a blunt force injury of the forehead, face, and upper lip. Probably when his face was on the ground. Probably some light bruising. Mucosal injuries of the lips, again, from probably being on the ground. Blunt force injuries of the shoulders, hands, elbows, and legs, again, from being restrained while on the ground. Pattern contusions of the wrist, consistent with restraints. Handcuffs. Natural diseases. This is important. Heart disease, multifocal, severe, hypertensive heart disease. And basically, when they weighed his heart was too heavy. So, and that's part of when you overdose on fentanyl, your heart is also too heavy. So, multiple things could be at play here. So Derek Chauvin he could have put the final nail in the coffin, and I know that is a bad pun, but that could have been the case. Or possibly the dude took so much drugs, it could have killed a horse and it killed him. So, no life-threatening injuries identified. No facial, oral, mucosal, or conjunctival, pedicat. I can't pronounce that. No injuries of the anterior muscles of the neck or laryngeal structures. No scalp, soft tissue, skull, or brain injuries. No chest wall, soft tissue injuries, root fractures, other than other than a single rib fracture from CPR, vertebral column injuries or visceral injuries, incision and subcutaneous disinfection of the posterior lateral neck or dissection of the posterior and lateral neck, shoulders, back, flanks, and buttocks, negative for occult trauma. So basically, when they sliced him open, they couldn't find basically anything other than superficial bruising. So they couldn't find any trauma to his neck where basically they said, oh, he was choked. If he was choked to death and basically he restricted the blood flow and the airflow, there would be bruising for 9 minutes. If I were to squeeze you for 9 minutes, even with my hand on your wrist, that's going to leave a bruise. So if Derek Chauvin did that to George Floyd's neck for 9 minutes, that would have led to bruising, and it didn't. So viral testing, basically he tested positive for COVID-19, so he was a COVID-19 death, of course. Toxicology, he had fentanyl of 11 nanograms per milliliter. The average death overdose of fentanyl is 9 ng per ml. He was tested positive for norfentanyl, 4-ANPP, methamphetamines, weed, contanine, caffeine, negative for drinking, cannabinoids, amphetamines, fentanyl, and metabolite, urine drug screen confirmation for morphine. So a lot of drugs in the system, guys. And this is important because you need to, if you're going to convict Derek Chauvin, you need to convict him beyond a reasonable doubt. And it's hard to convict him beyond a reasonable doubt if the dude had so much drugs in his system that if he would have been just found dead laying on the street by himself, the cops would have just, or not the cops, but basically the county, the medical examiner basically would have just said, hey, this was just a drug overdose. And people ask a lot of questions as to why George Floyd, basically Derek Chauvin, had his knee on his neck for so long. George Floyd was a big guy. George Floyd was 6'4", 223 pounds. He was not fat. The dude was stacked. The dude was probably like the size of a college tight end, right? So somebody who is tall, someone who's muscular, someone who's basically works at a bar. He's a bouncer. He knows how to move people around. He knows how to move around himself. So think about someone who's that big, that strong, and then dealing with excited delirium, dealing with not knowing exactly where he's at, dealing with basically panic, drug-induced, just being super excited, super agitated. He's going to be a danger to himself and everybody around him. And so that's not the only reason why I think he'll get off. He's also going to get off because of this. Minneapolis police training materials filed as an exhibit in court show a neck restraint similar to the one used on George Floyd. So you have three people, two people on this individual's back with a third person with a knee on his neck while they're restraining him. And this is important to note. So again, Derek Chauvin was doing exactly what he was trained to do and what he trains police officers to do. And actually, in the defense of one of the other cops, they kind of break it down. Minneapolis police training that was received by Lane, or overall 13 points were made by the defense's motion to dismiss the charges against Lane, which were as follows. He followed the training. Lane only had been on the job for 4 days. Chauvin, field training officers, 20 years experience. Lane put his gun away immediately once Floyd showed his hands. Floyd's resistance being handcuffed. Floyd's resistance walking to the squad. Floyd's resistance getting into the squad. Lane offered to sit with Floyd to roll down the windows to turn the air conditioning on in the squad. Floyd initially claimed he couldn't breathe when officers were attempting to put him in the squad vehicle before he was moved to the ground. So before he was even put on the ground, he claimed that he couldn't breathe, which meant he could have possibly already had been succumbing to the overdose of fentanyl. It's important to note, beyond a reasonable doubt, Floyd requested to be moved to the ground. Floyd continued to yell and move around while on the ground. So Chauvin probably had to put his knee on his neck to keep him from moving around. Lane questioned Chauvin twice about rolling Floyd on his side into the recovery position. That's important. But if he didn't basically vomit into his mouth and suffocate, basically go out the way Jimi Hendrix did, then that's really not an argument in this point, in my opinion. Floyd continued to yell. Lane questioned Chauvin twice about recovery position. Lane went into the ambulance and started CPR on Floyd. Lane's consistent statement to the surgeon at the scene. Lane voluntarily giving a statement corroborated by video. So that was one of the other police officers' defense statements. And Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison is expected to challenge the motion to dismiss brought up by Lane's attorneys, according to spokesperson from the office, and which is crazy, right? So you're holding somebody who's been on the force for 4 days responsible for the actions of someone who's been on the force for 20 years, when the person who was on the force for 20 years was doing exactly what he was taught to teach others how to do. So what is it? Right? You need to have some sort of standard other than we're going to basically follow the laws that social media tell us to follow. So why do I think it's not going to stick? Murder in the second degree. It's pretty hard to get a murder in the second degree. Causes the death of a human being without intent to the effect of death of any person, while intentionally inflicting or attempting to inflict bodily harm upon the victim. So the argument Derek Chauvin can make is I wasn't trying to hurt him. If I was trying to hurt him, you would see me basically beating him with my hands, beating him with a club, pistol whipping, tasing him, bear spraying him, doing all sorts of basically physical harm to him. But instead, I put him into a position where I can restrain him using as little force as possible. I was essentially using a pressure point and pinning him to the ground and just keeping him pinned to the ground until more help could arrive. The dude is a big guy. I didn't want to use lethal force. And so, guess what? I used the least harmful way I knew how to ensure that he was restrained and stayed where he was. So, I don't think second degree murder would stick. Murder in the third degree. Whoever without intent to the effect the death of any person causes the death of another by perpetuating an act eminently dangerous to others and evincing a depraved mind without regard for human life. So again, he wasn't doing an act eminently dangerous to others. He was doing what the, again, showing the tweet, showing the image. He was doing the act that he was trained to do. He was putting his neck on George Floyd's neck, exactly how he teaches others to do it, exactly how he was taught to do it, exactly how the police chief and how the mayor of Minneapolis said they're okay with restraining individuals who were basically being uncooperative while restrained. So he wasn't acting in a depraved mind. He was acting as someone, hey, look, I don't want to beat this person to death. I don't want to have to shoot this person. I don't want to have to tase them. I don't want to have to do all these things. I'm okay with basically having my knee hovering above the guy's neck because there was no bruises. So, right? So if he was putting enough pressure to basically cause him to suffocate, then he would have left a bruise, but he didn't. So he basically used as little force as possible. I know this is a hot take. People aren't going to like it, but the truth is the truth, and this is important to talk about. However, whoever George Floyd's drug dealer was could face murder in the third degree. Whoever without intent to cause death proximately causes death of a human being by directly or indirectly unlawfully selling, giving away, bartering, delivering, exchanging, distributing, or administering a controlled substance classified in Schedule 1 or 2 is guilty of murder in the third degree and may be sentenced to imprisonment of not more than 25 years. So George Floyd's drug dealer could be sentenced to 25 years because he's the one who gave him all those drugs that he decided to swallow at the last minute. So, and why I think manslaughter in the second degree won't stick: by the person's culpable negligence, whereby the person's creates an unreasonable risk and consciously takes chances causing death or great bodily harm to another. So again, he's using a tactic that the police department said he should use. If he would have tased him for 8 minutes, okay. If he would have shot him 18 times over the course of 8 minutes, okay. If he would have done so many other things, but no, he basically pressure pointed him onto the ground for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. I know it's a hard video to watch, but when George Floyd says, I can't breathe before he even goes onto the ground, as he's standing up going to the car and he's complaining that he can't breathe, then when he's on the ground, what do you think the cops are going to say when he's saying, while he's on the ground, I can't breathe? Well, your situation hasn't really gotten any worse. You were saying you couldn't breathe when you were standing up. We have an ambulance on the way, but you're acting crazy. We can't have you getting up and basically hurting people around you, because guess what? Our culpable negligence, whereby a person creates an unreasonable risk, that then we can be held liable for. It wouldn't be manslaughter, but they could be held liable for that culpable risk of basically not restraining a person just crazy high on drugs. So it's important to note that these people did what they were trained to do. They were put in a bad situation. You had a person that had so many drugs in his system that there was a possibility he was just going to die in that car anyway, even if the cops left him alone, because he swallowed all those drugs probably when the cop rolled up and asked him about that counterfeit $20 bill. And basically, he swallowed drugs thinking, okay, they're going to search me. I'm going to swallow these drugs. And he swallowed the drugs and just overdosed, right? And there's a possibility even if the cops left, that he just would have died in the street that day. So that's the reasonable doubt. The defense need to basically beat into that jury, basically saying, hey, our defendant basically did everything he was trained to do. He did everything he trains other police officers to do. And not only that, George Floyd had so many drugs in his system, he was already complaining about not being able to breathe before he was even put on the ground. But he was acting just irrationally. He was resisting arrest at all stages of the interaction. So, what are we supposed to do? What happens if he would have attacked the police officers if they wouldn't have had the knee on his neck? So, all they have to do is just drive that wedge of reasonable doubt in there, and they win the case. But unfortunately, if they win the case, Minneapolis is going to burn, half the country is going to burn. And I don't know what Joe Biden's going to do. Is he going to be called a fascistic Nazi when he has to send in the National Guard to stop these riots? Because it's Joe Biden's America. You can't blame Donald Trump for what's happening right now in Minneapolis. So that's going to be it right now, friends. I'll see y'all in a couple hours. Until then, have a good one. Bye.